Good morning, everyone. It's a nice brisk 52 degrees in this room and in the nice sunny Boston area. Thanks for listening. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson and I have talked several times throughout the years about different topics, and I've always kind of leaned on him because I consider him an expert and just a genuine, down to earth guy. So it's an honor to have him on this morning because I know he's a busy guy. He's got a family, he's got a lab, he's got all kinds of stuff going on. So thank you, Doctor. Thank you for coming on, and tell us a little bit about yourself in the professional world, maybe about personal and hobby life.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So I was one of those kids that fell in love with reptiles at a really young age. My dad kind of came from a family that had exotic animals growing up. My grandfather bred birds and so forth, and so I kind of came by that naturally. But from a young age, I kind of decided that I wanted to get a PhD and become a herpetologist, and stuck with that basically throughout grade school and then college and grad school and so forth. And so I, specifically kind of honed in on chameleons as like my major focal group when I was in middle school. And so 27 some odd years ago now or something like that is kind of when I honed in on really chameleons as my main focus. And so, I started keeping chameleons about that time. And when I first started, and I first told my parents that I was interested in getting a chameleon, my dad in particular was a little bit hesitant because he had chameleons back in the 60s when he was a kid, and was well aware with his background of kind of the reputation that chameleons had for being sensitive and so on. And as a middle schooler, he was a little bit hesitant to let me kind of take that plunge with something that he knew was a challenge. And so they challenged me and basically said, okay, if you do your research for 6 months and read everything you can and you're still interested and so forth, we'll let you get a chameleon. And I did, and it my interest and enthusiasm just kind of grew from there, and it just has snowballed since. And so I started with one chameleon, of course, and then got a pair, and then additional species, and just started reading everything I could, and chameleons just kind of became an obsession and really formed the backbone of a lot of my broader biological interests. And so after doing my undergrad, I did my undergrad in animal science at Cornell University, and then went on to do a PhD in biology. And my research for my PhD focused on the biomechanics associated with feeding in chameleons and salamanders, and particularly their tongue projection mechanism, and looking at how the environment impacts that performance. And so, I was really fortunate to start being able to work with the chameleons in a professional capacity at that point as well. And so anyway, I'm now a associate professor at the University of South Dakota. I have my own research group and lab where we focus on chameleons primarily. We have some other projects with like anoles and stuff like that as well, but chameleons are our main thing. And my research broadly focuses on biomechanics, functional morphology, the physiology of movement, how animals are able to perform in the capacity or in the context of their environment, and how the environment helps shape some of the variation we see across species. And then, that kind of broadens a little bit to, additional physiology of those animals. So like water balance and metabolic rates. But I also have kind of a conservation side to a lot of my work too. I'm also the chair of the IUCN's Chameleon Specialist Group.
Yes.
And so in that capacity, I'm kind of in charge of trying to lead a global conservation effort to address conservation concerns for chameleons and help provide scientific data to regulatory bodies and so forth, so that they can make informed decisions about chameleons. And so, with that professional capacity of working with chameleons in the lab and in the field through my work, I still also maintain kind of a hobby side of it as well, where I work with the animals at home. And over the years, over the last 27 years or so, I've worked with over 80 different species of chameleons in captivity to varying capacity. Some of them I've worked with for multiple generations and years. Other species, I was able to get a single wild caught import of that species. And it was a project that didn't go anywhere because there's nowhere for it to go. And then in the lab, I work with a variety of different chameleon species, both in the wild as well as in captivity. And we've over the years worked with 30 some odd species just in the lab as well.
Wow, that's incredible. So you said that I know that, and we'll get into this, but we outside of the lab, obviously you can't work with any of the animals that are in the lab because that's all heavily protected, and we can
Yep.
talk about that in a minute.
Yep.
What are you said about 80 species over your career so
Yeah.
far. Are you specializing outside of, for your hobby? Like, do you have like a couple species that you just really love and just have to have and really have to work with, and that's what you have at the house or at your facility?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a couple species that are particularly near and dear to my heart that I have worked with for years and really love. One of those is Trioceros hohenelli, the high
Oh,
caste
yes.
chameleon. They're just really firecrackers, in my opinion. Their personalities, they're just super interesting. They're relatively small, live bearing species, have really good temperature tolerances, particularly on the colder end of the spectrum, and they're feisty. I just like their personality, and so that's one that I work with. And I basically I always have Hohenelli at home, just because I really enjoy them. I also really enjoy some of the Brooksea species, the
Okay.
miniature leaf chameleons from Madagascar, just because I think their biology is super interesting and bizarre. And then after that, there's a number of species that I am working with that I find interesting, where I've been able to acquire some individuals, and I'm trying to see what I can do with them, and see if I can get them established in breeding and so forth. And so recently I've been working with Archaeus tigris, which is the
Oh, yeah.
Seychelles tiger chameleon, which is a monotypic, single species genus from the Seychelles, which is a super cool species. Challenging, not very many people working with them, but really interesting as well. And then I have a few Malagasy Kaluma species. I really like the small Kaluma species, the Kaluma beckeri, Kaluma linotum, Kaluma rooloco, some of those ones with the soft horn from their
Yeah.
tip of their nose, and the occipital lobes and so forth.
Yeah.
And so so I've got a number of species that I work with at home. Some really long term, like the Hohenelli and some of the Brooksea, and then others that are kind of newer projects that I'm seeing what I can do with.
Cool. So the ones from the Seychelles, the
Yeah,
tigers, are those
tigers.
live
Yeah.
bearing?
No, they're egg laying, and they're
Okay.
a weird egg laying species that in the wild, they've been observed actually laying their eggs in the kind of apex of like pandanus trees or pineapple, where the leaves kind of all come together. They
Mm.
basically like lay their eggs kind of where all those leaves come together, and they incubate there, and so they're a bizarre little chameleon.
Yeah, and they're relatively small too, right?
Yeah, we're
Like the
talking probably like Hohenelli size, but a little lighter bodied,
yeah.
similar length, but not quite as robust.
Do you think that part of the reason why they're a little bit challenging is because having that type of structure inside of an enclosure so they can actually do what they do in the wild?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a piece of it. I think fortunately, that's been documented in the wild, and so people kind of know that that's something to provide. And so I have like pineapple, plants in their enclosures. They're chameleons generally. Most species of chameleons are challenging in the sense that we just don't have it quite locked in as far as what it takes to get consistent breeding from them. And I think a lot of it is that we need more seasonal fluctuations and so forth that we don't tend to provide very well. You're doing awesome job with your gecko room there, cooling it down, but I think by and large, we tend to keep chameleons too warm in captivity, and we don't give them the seasonal temperature drops that a lot of them need for breeding, and particularly even like the day-to-day drops in temperature. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's the only thing with the Archaeus tigris. The Seychelles is actually a fairly consistent environment where they live, and it's on the warmer end of a lot of the chameleon species that live in more montane environments. But there's definitely like pieces to the puzzle that we just haven't quite figured out yet, and it can be challenging to get them to breed consistently.
Yeah, they look like an amazing species. I like the smaller species just because I feel like, not that I want to handle animals, because I don't really like, I don't like to handle my animals unless I absolutely have to. I just like to enjoy watching, their interactions and what they do in their habitat. But smaller for me is just more easier, just for the way that I have set up. So all the smaller chameleon species and all the smaller gecko species, and then when you add live bearing into some of them as well, it just adds another dynamic that is just in my opinion is just so fantastic and so eye-opening, that how much stuff you can learn just by just by doing working with some of those species. So you've been you are a you have your PhD. You run a lab now. Tell us if you can. I mean, I know that this is kind of a touchy subject for a lot of people, just because, and it is for me too, just because there's a lot of things that go into it, and there's a lot of things that you don't want to say. But maybe you can talk a little bit about like getting grants and getting the permits, because the chameleons that you're actually working with now, you can't sell, they can't leave the lab. When you're done with them, I'm guessing that they have to go back to South Africa. I mean, there's laws and regulations and stuff that you've signed that you can't go off the rails an ounce. You know what I mean? Which and I totally respect it, and I totally get that. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenges of getting the permits and the grants and getting the money to be able to do the studies that you're doing today.
For sure. Yeah. So, the rules and so forth, as far as, what we have to do with the animals, after we've done kind of the work we're doing in the lab with them, varies a little bit based on the source of the animals. And, all of the research that we do in the lab is reviewed by an institutional ethics committee that focuses on animal research. And so it's a federal law, actually, in the United States, that if you're doing research with vertebrate animals, that your research has to be approved, and protocols associated with it by what's called an IACUC, an institutional animal use and care. Well, anyway, I'm drawing a blank on the exact acronym at the moment, but anyway, it's a group of faculty, local community, vets, and so forth that reviews protocols, ensures that the research is being done ethically, that the questions that are being asked justify the use of animals, that the numbers of individuals are being monitored and are sufficient to answer the question, so that it's not just kind of a waste of the time and animals and so forth, but also not excessive for what we need. And so, first of all, basically everything we do is first and foremost, controlled and regulated by that. Those committees vary considerably by institution in some of their policies and so forth. And I'm actually quite lucky here at the University of South Dakota, because our Animal Use and Care Committee is very approachable, and I think has a good kind of level head about some of the work that we do. And one of the nice things about that is it sets us up to allow us to actually adopt some of the animals out if the research we're doing is like non-invasive and so forth, and the animals can't be transferred to another protocol or something for other work that we're doing on or doing with. And so, for instance, right now we have a whole bunch of like veiled chameleon eggs that are incubating, that one of my students is looking at, like metabolic rates of development and heart rate through incubation and critical thermal maxima and so forth, how flexible and how adaptable to different temperature regimes they are. And the offspring that are born from that, many of those are animals that we can use for other projects and so forth. But when you have eggs like that, there's the potential to have more. And we have it set up in our protocols that any animals that we don't need for other protocols, we can actually adopt those out to, individuals that are interested in and so forth. There's limitations, of course. We have to review their husbandry and make sure that they seem like they're a safe home for the animals and so forth. But that, so that's kind of one end of the extreme. We can do stuff like that. They've also allowed me to set up protocols where when I'm doing some of my high-speed video filming of feeding in chameleons, again, this is a non-invasive process where basically we're just filming the animals feeding, sometimes at different body temperatures and so forth. They've actually allowed me to have a protocol set up where I can, in theory, go visit breeders or keepers that have, certain species that I don't have data from, and actually collect data from those individuals. And then, those animals stay, of course, with the owner and so on. And similarly, I can do that with some of my own animals, like my Archaeus tigris, for instance. Nobody has those in the United States, and there's no data from them. And so, having that type of relationship with and coordination with our IACUC allows me to have protocols in place where I can collect some of that non-invasive data from some of my own animals for that type of data collection. And so that's super, super nice, and really gives us a lot of capabilities to get data that we might not otherwise be able to. On the other side of the spectrum, I work with a lot of South African bradypodon species currently, and the trade regulations associated with those animals out of South Africa is quite restricted. South Africa does not allow the export of wild-caught wildlife from their from their parks or from the country. In a few instances, there's one province, for instance, that will allow exports of genuine captive bred individuals, but they have a lot of restrictions about documentation and proof that needs to accompany those animals to show that they are genuinely bona fide captive bred animals. And so, the animals that I get out of South Africa for this research are scientific permits. They're under scientific permits on projects that are in collaboration with South African scientists as well. And we are allowed to export them for this work that has, been approved by our IACUC. It's been approved by ethics committees at my collaborators' institutions. We have provincial and national level permits to, collect and export those animals and so on. And one of the conditions of those permits is that the animals cannot be transferred to any other party, and basically at the end of the work, they need to be put down or euthanized rather than transferred anywhere. And so some of the work that we do does necessitate euthanizing the animals at the end of it, particularly looking at some of the physiological processes and so forth. But other animals were able to keep around in the lab for quite a while, and some of those animals too end up being gravid, and they're wild caught animals, and so we have had offspring that are born in the lab. Those offspring too are regulated by those rules, and so we can't transfer those either. But it's given us some really cool opportunities to kind of get some opportunistic additional data that's really informative about cost of reproduction and growth, and comparing live bearing species to egg laying species and so on. And the species that we have currently in the lab are all animals that are least concern in their conservation status, and so they're not they don't tend to be animals that are under severe threat, although many of the species that are listed as endangered or in those higher threat categories, it's based mostly on having a limited distribution, and so there's high levels of local endemism with chameleons, where, from a single mountain, a species has evolved, and it's found nowhere else. And because of that restricted distribution, that makes them at higher risk of extinction, effectively, because if they live on a volcanic mountain, for instance, and that volcano goes off, a single event could theoretically wipe out that species. And so that's some of the factors that go into these threat assessments. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that there isn't a healthy population at that location, and that that healthy population couldn't sustain moderate amounts of collection. And so we do work with some species that are threatened and so forth with this work, and we're still able to do it in many cases because of situations like that. And so, there's the permitting side can be quite challenging. To get these scientific permits from South Africa, I need to be working with South African collaborators. There's all kinds of assurances that I have to provide that, we won't transfer any of the animals, to other individuals, that basically at the end of the day, whatever that timeline is, that effectively they'll be preserved and added to research collections or a museum or something like that, rather than distributed out to the trade. And that's just South Africa's way of trying to control the conservation of their species. They want to, by and large, have a good handle on what's available and what isn't available, and kind of keep them restricted, so that there's not kind of a free-for-all that might help provide cover for illegal collection and so on. And that's controversial for a lot of people, particularly people in the hobbyist or trade sector, but ultimately that's just kind of their rules. And as a researcher, I have to kind of work within the confines of those rules. Then of course funding is a whole nother can of worms and problem, in the sense that it costs money for me and my students to go to South Africa to collect the animals, to export them back to the United States, and then to maintain them, in the lab, animal care and maintenance and so forth, and then any costs associated with the research. And that those research expenses don't come from the university typically as part of my salary or my package or anything like that. My salary is mostly paid for from my teaching obligations and so forth, and the tuition dollars that come in from that. And while when you start a position, they give you some funding to help build your lab initially. The continued research progression really relies on being able to obtain funds to do that work, and those can come from a variety of sources. There are some internal small grants, particularly for students, that they can apply for to supplement the cost of their research. Some of those costs ultimately end up coming out of pocket. And then there's, larger pools of money that you can apply for from federal agencies or management agencies or foundations or things like that. And fortunately, I've been able to secure, a federal grant for a lot of this research looking into thermal specialization and adaptive processes associated with the physiology of chameleons in different environments, and basically how different thermal environments help shape these thermal adaptation patterns, how flexible that adaptation or acclimation is, across different timescales and so on. And so that's really kind of enabled us to do a lot of this work, where we're able to collect these animals in South Africa and get a lot of this data, and then also present that data at conferences and submit publications on this, and do popular press type outreach and education components related to the work as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. I mean, that's I know that you had went to, I believe Kenya this last year or this last summer to co-teach. Yeah, this summer to co-teach a 2-week ecology, course.
Yeah.
Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So my wife is also a faculty member in the same department as I am. We're both biologists, and her research is different than mine, but she did a lot of her PhD work in Kenya, doing field work with invasive bird species, actually in
Wow.
Kenya. And then during her postdoc work, she was at a university in the UK, doing her postdoc work, and they had summer field ecology courses that they took their graduate students on. And so with her background in Kenya, that she helped co-lead some of those courses. And of course, I have a lot of experience doing field work in Africa as well, and had, been to Kenya and traveled around there. And so when we got our faculty positions here, one of the things we wanted to do was create one of these field courses, or they call them faculty-led programs here, to take students to Kenya and basically expose them to the, ecology and natural history and diversity of habitats and so forth, of the Central Highlands regions of Kenya. And so this past summer we took a class of 21 students from the University of South Dakota, and basically spent 2 weeks traveling around various parts of Kenya with them, exposing them to different habitats, different types of reserves. So whether it's like a community run reserve or a national park or a private conservancy, and so forth. Kind of talked a lot about the management strategies of those different types of parks. Talked a lot about some of the cultural underpinnings of how Kenyans broadly think of land management, whether they tend to be from more of a herdsman type tribal background, or more of a agricultural tribal background. Talked a little bit about colonial history and how that's impacted or shaped some of the conservation in Kenya, and just kind of introduce these students, many of whom have never been out of the country. Many of them had never been on an airplane before, to how unique and diverse and interesting some of these habitats can be. Because I think a lot of students and a lot of adults, when they think of Africa and they think of Kenya, they have a Lion King type image in their head of Serengeti and Masai Mara national parks, and that's kind of Africa for them. And one of the things that has always been so incredible and amazed me is just how diverse these habitats actually are. And we take these students and we take them to high elevation moorland habitat, high heath type habitat, actual kind of like rainforest type habitats around like Mount Kenya. We take them up to kind of a southern projection of like Somali desert type habitat going into central Kenya. We take them to some of that like savanna grassland type habitat, and woodland type habitat, and just see an incredible amount of animals. And in the process, we help them do data collection and teach them how to do like some field research and field ecology, where they're doing point counts or something for different animals as we're going through the parks, or taking observations on plant structure or pollinator diversity and stuff like that, to kind of collect some of that data and do some analysis of it and so forth. And so that's the third time we've been able to do that trip from USD. We had a fourth one planned in 2020, but obviously with COVID and everything, that all got shut down. But it's really, I think, an incredible experience for the students. And like I said, many of them have never been on an airplane before. Some of them, the biggest city that they had ever been to is Sioux Falls, which is, less than 250,000 people.
Right.
So we're not talking, that they've ever been in big cities. And we land in Nairobi after traveling for hours and hours and hours, multiple segments of the trip. And then all of a sudden we're in Nairobi traffic, with multiple lanes, kind of stopped still, people walking up and down between the car lanes selling stuff. And I have a memory of one of my our students in a previous trip, that had never flown. Like I said, the largest city he'd ever been to was Sioux Falls, and so never really experienced anything like that. And it was eye-opening for
Oh
him.
yeah.
And he ended up getting a job as a zookeeper, based largely on the fact that he had actually been to some of the habitats and observed some of the animals that he would be working with, in that zoo setting. So. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's like for me when I moved out to Boston 10 years ago. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in Minnesota, and I
Yeah.
spent 17 years in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's like I
Yeah.
come out here and it's a whole different level. I
Yeah.
was kind of sheltered, so it's a really cool story to hear that, and
Yeah.
it helped him grow himself. So that's awesome.
For sure. Yeah.
So running a full-time lab, I
Mhm.
mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit. It looks like I did look at I mean, you're very active on your webpage, or your students are,
Yep.
and it's awesome. And you talked about being the chair of the other
ICN Chameleon Specialist
Yes,
Group.
thank you. That's a fantastic page too. I mean, I've learned a ton of stuff on there, but maybe talk about like the everyday challenges. When you have I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 people. I don't even know what you have, but I mean, being in, with all the laws and regulations that you have and all the things that you need to, because you got to trust other people too. You can't you can't be just the one following them. You can't see a kid take a Brady Pody and whatever out of there. I mean, there's got to be a lot of trust. There's got to be a lot of things put in place to, make sure that you don't get caught for somebody else's screw up. So,
For sure.
I mean, I'm talking more in,
totally. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, can you like hit on some of that maybe?
Yeah, totally. So, in my lab, I have a postdoc. And so a postdoc, if you're not familiar with it, is basically somebody who's gotten their PhD, and usually kind of newly out of their PhD, and they go work in a lab to do some additional research and get some experience, oftentimes in slightly different type of, processes or techniques than they may have otherwise had, just to kind of gain some additional experience and time to publish and so forth before applying for like faculty jobs or, the kind of more quote unquote terminal jobs. And so I have one postdoc in my lab. I have 5 PhD students, and I have 11 or 12 undergrads who are doing research in my lab as well. And so that's, it's a fair sized group, and it definitely takes a fair bit of coordination. One of the things is it requires a lot of training, and so ultimately, I train everyone on how to do, animal care and what my expectations are, train them on, what the expectations of our IACUC are, and they have trainings for all of our personnel about, what they're supposed to be doing as far as, monitoring and ethics and so forth. And, if there's a problem, what we have to do as far as like notifying vets and communicating those issues. And so, we have a lot of protocols and trainings that go into making sure students are aware of what their obligations are, what the expectations are, and what they should do as far as who they should let know if they have any questions or concerns or notice anything. As far as like permits go, I handle all the permits. That legal side of it is something that I have to ultimately be responsible for, and so I handle all the permits. They're all listed on my permits and so forth. And then when we're in the field and so on, I'm with them. We're traveling around together, and I'm overseeing the process and everything. And I help train them on what that takes and what those processes involved, so that they ultimately at some point would be able to do a lot of that stuff themselves. But that just by the nature of what it is, I'm bound by my institution to be responsible for that, as well as legally and so on. And so I have to oversee a lot of that. But each one of my postdocs and graduate students have their own individual projects that they're working on for their dissertations, and are kind of leading. And I oversee all of those projects. I coordinate with them. I help develop the projects. I help them with techniques and getting it going, and help with the data collection and so forth. And so I'm kind of in charge of overseeing all of that and coordinating and organizing. But there is a lot of individual drive of some of those projects from my students as well. And that is really great because it allows the lab to explore a lot more questions than if it was just me driving every single piece of the puzzle. And there's just not enough hours in the day for one person to do that. And when you have a team that you've trained and you've worked on, and you're helping them develop ideas and projects, or providing ideas and projects, and they're kind of running with it, it's amazing the productivity that we can get out of the lab as a whole. And then that trickles down to the undergrads. Some of those undergrads are working with like honors theses, and they kind of have their own little projects that they're collecting data on. Some of them are just kind of volunteering in the lab to get some experience, and they're oftentimes helping some of the graduate students, or me, or postdoc or whatever, with some of the data collection and so on. And so there's a lot of moving pieces. I have weekly lab meetings where I'm trying to keep track of what everybody's doing and where everybody's is on projects, and what progress there is, or what issues there are. And a lot of the time I feel like I'm kind of running around putting out fires, and troubleshooting, and that kind of my job has transitioned a little bit to a lot of the day-to-day data collection, to management, and running around and troubleshooting with everyone, and trainings and so forth. But it's awesome. I really enjoy it. I like working with the students, and I love being able to facilitate all of that research, and help kind of direct and lead that research in different directions. And so that's really a lot of fun. Part of my job, of course, also is teaching. And so right now I'm teaching a vertebrate anatomy and embryology course to about 33 students. That takes up a good chunk of time between lectures and labs and so forth. I'll be teaching next fall. So I'm on sabbatical in the spring, where I'll be spending a lot of time in South Africa with my collaborators and students collecting data. But next fall, I'll be teaching herpetology. And then I rotate through a few other classes as well, for either our med bio students, or our like kind of pre-PT track, or just general conservation bio ecology type students. And then on top of that as well, there's like a service component where we're expected to like serve on committees for the university, as well as the field broadly. And so I'm doing things like reviewing manuscripts for publication, for peer review, peer reviewing grants that are submitted to either federal agencies, or societies and so forth. I serve on various committees for the department and the college and the university, and then community outreach and so forth. And so there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that we have to pull together, and it definitely keeps me busy. It's one of those things where there aren't enough hours in the day to do everything that I would like to do, or be able or need to do ultimately. And so there's always something to keep me busy, that's for sure.
That's incredible. I don't know how you sleep,
and it can be tough sometimes.
And then you have your family too on top of it.
And the hobby side of having
the hobby side of
too.
things. I mean, that is incredible. I'm just guessing, but I'm sure. Well, I know you have. You've built a ton of relationships all over the world. I mean, and that's just a given. From your well-known dedication and research, can you share anything where it was very difficult, maybe in a particular country or a particular area, where it was extremely hard to start a relationship? I'm guessing based on trust, respect, and responsibility, and all that stuff. And maybe you don't necessarily name the country or anything like that if you don't want to. That's cool. I get that. But maybe just share about how it was difficult, you know, and
Yeah,
how you really had to really work hard at that relationship to build that next step of what
totally.
you were kind of looking for.
Totally. Fortunately, when I'm talking about other researchers or practitioners in other countries, I've really found that they have tended to have a similar type of passion that I do, and they are kind of excited for a lot of the same things that I am, and generally have always been really open to collaborations and working together, or providing information for like the conservation side of things, and I've found that working with other researchers has been really pleasant and nice, and just spending some time to communicating with them and so forth about ideas and their work and so forth has been awesome. A lot of the challenges really come from the permitting side of the equation, and
Ah,
that's where you start coming into a lot of bureaucracy, how kind of the government structure is and laws are set up, and you don't necessarily always have the same level of interest or dedication, in the work that you're necessarily interested in.
mhm.
A lot of these people, particularly in Africa, you're dealing with management agencies that are dealing with, the rhino horn crisis, or
Yeah,
elephants and lions and stuff like that. And so they have pretty major conservation issues that they are having to deal with and address. And you come in and it's like, I want to study chameleons, and and they're just like, you're not my priority. You like, I fine, that's great, whatever. And so it can be challenging to sometimes, in some cases, to get some of the same buy-in, let's say, from management agencies for groups of species that maybe aren't as focal, or don't have kind of the same visibility to their conservation
sure.
issues. And so, and they're also tend to be overworked and not enough resources, and
Of
so forth.
course.
Um, and so, it can be challenging sometimes, getting management agencies to respond, to give information about, the process that you need to go through to apply for permits and get permits. It can be challenging sometimes because they're oftentimes used to thinking about some of these conservation and management agencies at the level of like rhinos, not little lizards, and so that obviously affects the range and the population densities, and so it's different for them, and that can be challenging, to communicate some of those issues, or those differences, in a way that helps them make informed decisions, or helps facilitate some of the research. And so, some countries are better than others. They're just a little bit more organized. They're more active in,
Mm,
some of those research things. There's many countries, excuse me, there's many countries that just don't have a lot of that activity of research, and so you communicate with some of those places and they don't even know what the process is, and so that can be challenging because you have to then kind of facilitate navigation of some of the rules and regulation for that country or that province, and so forth. And so there's definite challenges there. Fortunately, though, I've found generally that when you do get into touch with these people and can communicate them, they're genuinely curious, even if they don't have the experience. And with some of my work in various places, once I've been able to go through the process and get the permits, start progressing and so forth, and I go and I go into the offices or go to these parks where I'm collecting, and I spend some time to open my computer and show them some of the high speed video of the chameleons shooting their tongue out, and they're fascinated by it, and it helps, I think, instill that curiosity and make them have a little bit more appreciation for
sure.
those animals. And similarly, I did some work with Tanzanian management authorities prior to, so right now in Tanzania there's an export ban on all wildlife that was instigated by the Tanzanian government.
Yes.
And prior to that, I had done some work where we were trying to help them address some issues with CITES that they were having. And myself and another individual from the chameleon specialist group were able to go out there and meet with, management agencies and exporters and so forth, and talk about various issues that these stakeholders had. And being able to then at the end of the trip kind of do a presentation for all of these management authorities, and kind of talk to them about kind of the issues we had found, and some potential mechanisms we had thought of that they could help deliver to address those issues, and kind of the enthusiasm and excitement is was refreshing. But it can take a little while to get to that point where you just get them on board and invested, and intrigued, or you basically kind of get to the point where you can start making some of those recommendations. And some of it, like I said, is that they're just overworked, or focused on something else. Others is that some of it's cultural, and just kind of what they view their position as, and kind of the hierarchy of like what you have to go through. And so there's different challenges working in different parts of the world, and with different groups. And but generally I find that most of these people are interested deep down, and it just takes communicating that interest, and giving them a reason to care, and so forth. And yeah, you can make it happen.
Do you think that Tanzania and South Africa will ever open their borders again?
That's a good question. And for years with Tanzania, we've been hearing that they're getting ready to reopen. The president, or there's a new minister, or the minister has communicated to the exporters that the plan is in the new year that they'll open, and it hasn't materialized. That's not to say that it won't, but we haven't seen kind of a lot of concrete progression. There's been little changes and indications that maybe it's moving that way eventually, but I don't know entirely. I think it's entirely possible, but I'm not holding my breath for a timeline of it. South Africa, I think that they are much more steadfast in their regulations. I could see instances where there is an increased prevalence of captive breeding of some of the native wildlife, particularly like KwaZulu-Natal, that satisfies the regulatory checks and so forth that they have to ensure that it's true captive breeding. And I could see that as a result of something like efforts like that there would be more export of like captive bred wildlife in that capacity.
Sure.
I'd be a little surprised from South Africa if we saw, quotas for wild caught exports for trade purposes. Again, anything can happen. You could have a change of government, and all of a sudden priorities change, or mentality changes, and that can change things. I think another good example of how things can change is Madagascar. When I started in chameleons and so forth in the late 90s, this was immediately after the trade suspension from CITES on basically all chameleon species except for 4 and some Brooksia species, and we went through almost 20 years, not quite 20 years, like 15 or plus years of those species simply not being exported from Madagascar. And there was a lot of illegal trade and so forth, and laundering of animals through Asia and Europe in particular. But by and large, it was just kind of like, no, they don't come out. And we didn't really necessarily think that there was much chance of reversing that. And then over a few year period, we saw kind of one species be released on a kind of trial basis. First for Campani was one of those first species, and then after that they were able to address the issues with CITES and have that suspension lifted. And now there's trade from Madagascar in many different species with quotas based on the IUCN Red List conservation status and so forth. And now they actually export quite a few species, and that's a huge shift from where we were 20 plus years ago.
Right.
And I don't know that 15 years ago I would have expected that by now we would have the levels of trade out of Madagascar that we do. So I think anything is possible. Generally speaking, over the years, what I've seen is a trend where countries that were exporting large numbers start imposing restrictions, and so there's less trade from a lot of these places, and some of that reverses, but I think generally it's not going to ever be like it was back in the 80s and 90s by and large with a lot of the export of these species, and we are seeing more and more restriction from a lot of countries, and so the landscape, I think, is always changing as far as what that trade looks like, and who knows what it will be. In some ways we may have more from certain areas, but I think in many we'll have less.
Yeah. We're going to shift gears a little bit to the go through a couple questions with the Brady Podium because we're getting close to our hour here. But talk about the Brady Podium that are currently in the hobby and how they used to be imported regularly back, probably 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now. And why they're not seeing much in the hobby now.
So Bradypodon, there's a few species that you see around in the trade. Bradypodon thamnobates is one that is really popular. They're kept quite a bit in Europe and bred. So that's the Natal Midlands dwarf chameleon. You see a few Bradypodon pumilum, which is the Cape dwarf chameleon, which is a beautiful species from like the Cape Town area. Again, mostly in Europe. For a while, you saw Bradypodon transvalensi, which is the Wolkberg dwarf chameleon. Some of those, came into the U.S. Some of them came into Europe, but those have kind of fizzled out in captivity. You do see Bradypodon damaranum, which is the Neisner dwarf chameleon, and you see that in Europe and a few people in the United States. And then you see a few, limited numbers of a couple additional species, Bradypodon sataroi, Sataro's dwarf chameleon, and occasionally Bradypodon caeferum, and a couple others that you see just like limited numbers. A lot of that, limited availability has to do with the fact that you can't really get wild caught animals out of South Africa to replenish lines and so forth. And so theoretically, what you have in captivity should be based on, captive bred, long-term captive bred lineages. The reality is there is still, a fair bit of smuggling of animals out of South Africa that occurs. Those animals are brought into captivity and kind of added to the captive gene pool and contribute to some of the breeders and offspring that are produced, and so it's not like a clean, it's never been like a clean cutoff necessarily with wild caught sources. It's just kind of the unfortunate side of things on the legal perspective. But it limits, a lot of that trade and like what can come in and be represented as legitimate. When these species are being bred in captivity, say in Europe, to get those to the United States, obviously it requires CITES permits, which are basically permits, international trade permits that regulate the trade in endangered species or species that could be endangered by trade. And theoretically, in order to get those permits, a breeder would need to be able to show that they came from legal sources, so that they're captive bred and that the offspring are from legal parents, generations, and so forth. And, some of the requirements of being able to do that vary based on the country that's issuing the permits. Sometimes it's just a matter of, here is a legal import permit back from the 80s that shows that, they were legally imported. And, I've gotten these from these various sources, and they've gotten them from various sources, and there's this long history of having them. And here's some pictures of babies or babies being born and so forth. And so it comes, there's varying levels of challenge associated with providing the documentation necessary to get the export permits. Bradypodon then do tend to be a little bit sensitive, more sensitive than like veileds or panther chameleons or something like that. And so breeding success is more limited. Long-term success is a little bit more limited than those species. And so they've always been kind of a more niche type species in the hobby with lower numbers and so forth, as far as how many are kept and so on. Over the years, we've had various species in the trade in the U.S. Most of the time when those have come in, it's been, a few different people have gotten one or two pairs or something like that. And things tend to, fizzle out. And I think that's one of the problems we've had in captivity in the trade with many of these species is for various reasons, space, financial costs, and so forth. When people try to work with a species, they tend to work in quite low numbers. And that is with species that are challenging to breed and relatively short life cycles. I'm talking on like the level of comparison to like tortoises or something like that. You have a high probability for failure in that type of situation. You're not setting yourself up well for success. When you can work with larger numbers of founder individuals to start breeding, or you're dealing with an animal that lives for a lot longer and you can have more time to figure them out, you have better chances of success. And I think with chameleons, that's one of the downsides and one of the reasons we failed with so many species to really establish strong captive populations is that people don't tend to work with the size groups that they need to really be successful. And we don't have a lot of the benefit of time on our side to, tweak things every year just a little bit to get them dialed in. Now, as far as exports, export history from South Africa goes, for a number of years, we were getting exports of Bradypodon thamnobates from KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa, as well as for a short period of time, some of the transvalency, Bradypodon transvalency. And with the Bradypodon transvalency, it seemed pretty clear from the animals that were coming in that these were wild-caught animals that were kind of being misrepresented as captive bred or farmed or something and sent out. We were getting adult animals, gravid females, animals that had quite a bit of like scarring and beaten up, healthy, but there was just clear indicators that these aren't animals that a breeder would be sending out. And that got shut down before too long. A few shipments that went out, they kind of stopped that. With the exports from KwaZulu-Natal, most of those exports from Bradypodon thamnobates were young animals that looked like they could legitimately have been, captive bred or at least captive born. And so for a number of years, there was a single exporter in South Africa who was exporting significant numbers of Bradypodon thamnobates to the United States, to Europe, to Canada, to Asia, and so forth. And that it was quite nice from a hobbyist standpoint that we had access to these animals. They were relatively reasonably priced. We had kind of opportunities to build breeding groups. For various reasons, those they weren't as widespread as success as we might have hoped. But over time, some of the management authorities in South Africa started recognizing that there seemed to be evidence for that exporter collecting specimens from the wild, basically gravid females, getting the babies to, the females to give birth to the babies, and then raising those up for a couple months and exporting those rather than actually doing genuine captive breeding. The rules in South Africa, at least in KwaZulu-Natal, is for it to be considered a bona fide captive bred individual, it has to actually be second generation captive bred. And there was also some evidence that even maybe some young animals from the wild were being collected. And so they had some like photographic evidence of wild animals that then suddenly seemed to be appearing in this guy's collection or being exported. There was also a lot of evidence that he was starting to collect other species and trying to send those out mislabeled as Thamnobates. There's quite a bit of conversations that were recorded and texts and so forth from him, basically promising to do that. There were some issues where some European hobbyists came down and visited him, and he took them out to sites for all of these species. And then, a week later, after they got back, all of those species were for sale in Germany. And that raised a lot of eyebrows in South Africa among management authorities. And then it ended up coming out that this breeder had basically ripped off importers in the United States, Canada, Germany, Asia from like tens of thousands of dollars each. And so like he owed like hundreds of thousands of dollars basically across all these people. And at that point, the management authorities basically stepped in and said, from this point forward, you need to prove genetically that these are second generation captive bred babies, which means we need DNA samples from each of these babies, from their parents, and then the parents of those parents. And we have to be able to, genetically show that you have had those multiple generations in your collection, and that they are the descendants of those animals. And that creates a lot of challenges. It really forces you to have really good records. You have to have those DNA samples and so on. And ultimately, most people can't really do that, and there's a financial cost to it as well. And so it kind of got shut down for a number of years. Now, recently, over the last few years, there has been a company that has invested in some partnerships in South Africa to basically work towards being able to do that. And they've been able to breed at their facility, document multiple generations of captive breeding. They've ended up finally being able to prove out their offspring, their neonates, as being legitimate second generation captive born babies. And then they were able to export, I think, the first shipment of those babies to the United States earlier this year, to kind of the partner that individual had in the United States, helping to fund that. And that's great. I mean, that's the type of trade that ultimately the South African regulations are trying to limit to, or I don't want to say necessarily they're trying to create that, because that might not be true, but they're at least trying to, make sure that those are the bounds of the trade that is occurring. And the fact that, that we're starting to see some of that is a good sign. And it's impressive. But it also means that those animals have a lot of financial investments behind them that need to be recovered from those individuals, and that has the consequence of pricing many people out of the market. It also facilitates some of those same issues that I mentioned about when you're trying to establish a species in captivity, you need to have a large enough group to do it, and that becomes more challenging, of course, when they're more and more expensive. So so I mean, I think with the trade in South African Bradypodon, there's some promising progression. It has some drawbacks, from the standpoint of like the hobby side of it. But ultimately, we are seeing some of that start to occur a little bit from those legal channels.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So real quick, do you think that, you said obviously not having a large enough collection as a founder stock, when I agree with that. Do you think that maybe temperature, I mean, we talked about that earlier. Do you think temperature and quality of food and the stuff. Do you think all that contributed to that as well? You think?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Like I said, I think we keep chameleons in captivity generally too warm. I think we don't provide them generally with the fluctuations that they need, particularly like nighttime temperature drops and seasonal variation. I think that those factors ultimately shorten the lifespan of some of these animals and reduce the reproductive success of those individuals. I think that dietarily, we're not providing an ideal diet. For instance, many of these bradypodon are eating like flies and flying prey items, and that's quite different than like crickets and roaches and stuff like that a lot of people tend to offer. And so I think that there's definitely a nutritional dietary component that we should be trying to mimic some of that more natural diet in captivity that we're not doing as well. I think humidity and water delivery has also been a challenge in captivity. Screen cages are still kind of the standard for how chameleons are kept in captivity, and there's an increased recognition that you can use glass terrariums quite effectively. But those two different types of captive environments provide very different humidity environments, and that really changes the dynamics of how to provide water and moisture to your animals. And I think that this one downside of like screen enclosures is particularly in environments where you have like air conditioning. You're sucking the humidity out of the air with the air conditioning in order to maintain the temperatures, which you need to maintain the temperatures. But that's also meaning that you're increasing like evaporative water loss of those animals and so forth. And to be able to keep them hydrated, you have to mist them significantly more or provide foggers and so forth, and to try and offset a lot of that. And that creates some unnatural conditions and challenges, for instance. Whereas, some keepers keeping them in like glass terrariums might be better able to mimic some of those more natural characteristics by maintaining, humidity a little bit more and, providing more of an environment that fosters maintenance of hydration based on like, humidity and so forth than like constant rain and so on. So I think there's a lot of factors in our husbandry that are getting better in many ways, but that have contributed over the years to that. And it's just exacerbated by the fact that, people are working with limited numbers of individuals, and that chameleons by and large tend to be short-lived relatively to other species. And that's one of the things, like with tortoises and turtles, there's been some great success with setting up assurance colonies and so forth for many of these species. There's numerous species that are fairly widely captive bred at this point. And I think one of the benefits is you can spend the time to get those animals acclimated once you get them in from the wild and get them stabilized. You can spend some time kind of figuring out their dietary and care requirements. You can spend some time figuring out what it takes to get them cycled. You can spend some time figuring out what it takes to incubate those eggs and hatch the babies and so forth. And then once you've gotten all that dialed in, you still have plenty of time with that individual before they reach the end of life and or end of reproductive range. With a lot of these chameleons, if you get them in as adults, they may only have a year or two at that point before kind of their typical end of life. In the wild, many of these species are only living a couple years, or some even maybe a year. And that doesn't give a whole, and in captivity, they live for longer, and we can prolong that still. But we're still not talking about years and years and years of troubleshooting to try and figure out what it takes to cycle that animal and so forth. And that's been the major challenge, I think, for establishing some of these chameleon species in captivity, really with strong populations.
Yeah. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. It's been right over an hour.
No
Dr.
worries.
Chris Anderson, I want to let you go and deal with and have a wonderful weekend with your family, and I'm sure you
Appreciate
got
it.
plenty of things to do. So, great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a true honor. I learned a lot today. I hope everybody that listens to us learns a lot. I hope that we can visit again sometime.
Definitely. No, I enjoyed it. Thanks a bunch.
Yes, absolutely. Have a wonderful weekend, sir. Thank
You
you.
too. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Dr. Anderson, what a wonderful conversation. I know he's got a lot of things going on with his family, and he's got, I mean, as you guys listened, he's got so much going on, and also my battery's going really, I didn't want it to get cut out too. So, yeah, Noltenas are doing well here. I'm hoping to start cooling them in, they're cooling now, obviously, but I'm hoping to, December and January will be the no heat at all in about 5 or 6 hours for the day. You can see my humidifier. I'm still running my humidifier to keep the room above 65% in the room as a whole. Mist system goes on once a day. So